So here we are. Before I forget, I want to say the little lambs outside, those of us who were here a month ago and they were just born and they were just like, they were just barely born. They are so solid right now. They're just, it's really, they're right outside the outside bathroom a minute ago, but who knows where they'll be by the time you go out. So I want to start by saying something about Carolyn Meister, and I notice one of the firefighters is wildland firefighters is on the on Zoom, and I want to acknowledge that because I know Caroline because I was, as many of you know, at Tassajara for the wildland firefighter retreat for 9 days, end of December through New Year's Eve and New Year's, and anyway, for 9 days we were all down there, which is an intense thing anyway, to be at Tassajara, to be in retreat for that amount of time. And because it was sherum, Carolyn, who is a gardener, one, which is of course close to my heart, two, that Shika normally, which is what she was during her most recent position, which is guest manager, but during the retreat, she was acting director because so many people had left. I mean, they go to be with their families, but she stayed down there and took care of all of us. So I feel like I had the privilege to really be with her in multiple interactions over the course of those 9 days, and found her to be just extraordinarily present, kind, helpful, generous. I will say that the words that arose to me, which of course are coming, re-arising for me now, and I don't mean this in a comparative way, is I thought she's the best of us. Is the way she was in her presence as a Zen person and a person moved me very deeply. And then the thought that came after that was, I have a particular language, but the feeling is we're okay. Zen is okay if there are students like this coming forward. Oh, she's our future. But sometimes you look around, you know, and a lot of us are aging, and Zen Center is wonderful, and I also know it's COVID, like many institutions, it's been trying to find its own adjustments, and I looked at her and some of the other young people down there and thought, we're okay. And we're okay. Because she's now one of our ancestors. She went out for a hike like many of us do on a day off, on a trail that many of us have been on, the horse pasture trail, and told people where she was going, more or less. People had a sense. Always tell people where you're going, and let's all now think about whether you should be hiking out there by yourself. She was 30 years old. Had a packed lunch, and when she didn't come back at the end of the day, Tassajara started searching, and by Tuesday they had called in search and rescue, and there were 13 different agencies, I think, involved that came in. I mean, I don't know that you could ask for more in terms of, the news conference said there had been responses from all over the country, people wanting to come in and try to help find her, and they found her 4 days later. She had fallen at a particularly, I was up on that trail, Bruce and I were up there 2 years ago, so I mean, it's fairly recent in my memory. There's a particular part of that trail that's more precarious, And it's where she fell, and she fell off a cliff down a waterfall, essentially. And found her body at the bottom. So I wanted to, some of you may know, and I certainly know, but I've been reviewing it. There is in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. My son does bookbinding. He did the binding on this copy of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Nirvana the Waterfall. The minute I heard that she died falling down a waterfall. I mean, so much grief and many feelings, but I thought, she died falling down a waterfall. So I want to read a good portion of this, and there's other things I want to say, and we'll just see what we get to. This is Suzuki Roshi, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I went to Yosemite National Park and I saw some huge waterfalls. This particular waterfall in the summer is usually dried up or has a little trickle. Right now it's really running. The one that Suzuki Roshi said, the highest one there is 1,340 feet high, and from it the water comes down like a curtain thrown from the top of the mountain. It does not seem to come down swiftly as you might expect. It seems to come down very slowly because of the distance. And the water does not come down as one stream, but is separated into many tiny streams. From a distance, it looks like a curtain. And I thought it must be a very difficult experience for each drop of water to come down from the top of such a high mountain. Very easy to take this, I think, and to imagine Carolyn falling down. It takes time, a long time for the water finally to reach the bottom of the waterfall. And it seems to me that our human life may be like this. We have many difficult experiences in our life. But at the same time, I thought, the water was not originally separated, but was one whole river. Only when it is separated does it have some difficulty in falling. It is as if the water does not have any feeling when it is one whole river. Only when separated into many drops can it begin to have or to express some feeling. When we see one whole river, we do not feel the living activity of the water. But when we dip a part of the water into a dipper, we experience some feeling of the water. And we also feel the value of the person who uses the water. Feeling ourselves and the water in this way, we cannot use it in just a material way. It is a living thing. Before we were born, we had no feeling. We were one with the universe. This is called mind only, or essence of mind, or big mind, or love. After we are separated by birth from this oneness, as the water falling from the waterfall is separated by the wind and the rocks, then we have feeling. You have difficulty because you have feeling. You attach to the feeling you have without knowing just how this kind of feeling is created. When you do not realize that you are one with the river or one with the universe, you have fear. Whether it is separated into drops or not, water is water. Our life and death are the same thing. And when we realize this fact, we have no fear of death anymore. And we have no actual difficulty in our life. Pardon me, maybe as a balm or an antidote to imagining, which I think is hard to not imagine, what it would have been like to fall, that moment of slipping and falling. And I also can imagine it slow motion and timeless. And all of this suddenly seems very, very relevant to me in terms of the mystery of this life and this death. When the water returns to its original oneness with the river, it no longer has any individual feeling to it. It resumes its own nature and finds composure. How very glad the water must be to come back to the original river. Mm-hmm. If this is so, what feeling will we have when we die? I think we are like the water in the dipper. We will have composure then, perfect composure. Carolyn was a very deep practitioner. It may be too perfect for us just now because we are so much attached to our own feeling, to our own individual existence. For us, just now we have some fear of death, but after we resume our true original nature, there is nirvana. That is why we say, to attain nirvana is to pass away. To pass away is not a very adequate expression. Perhaps to pass on, or to go to, or to join would be better. Will you try to find some better expression for death? When you find it, you will have quite a new interpretation of your life. It will be like my experience when I saw the water in the big waterfall. Imagine it was 1,340 feet high. We say, everything comes out of emptiness. One whole river or one whole mind is emptiness. When we reach this understanding, we find the true meaning of our life. When we reach this understanding, we can see the beauty of human life. Before we realize this fact, everything that we see is just delusion. Sometimes we overestimate the beauty. Sometimes we underestimate or ignore the beauty because our small mind is not in accord with reality. To talk about it this way is quite easy, but to have the actual feeling is not so easy. But by your practice of Zazen, you can cultivate this feeling. When you sit with your whole body and mind and with the oneness of your mind and body under the control of the universal mind, you can easily attain this kind of right understanding. Your everyday life will be renewed without being attached to an old erroneous interpretation of life. When you realize this fact, you will discover how meaningless your old interpretation was and how much useless effort you are making. You will find the true meaning of life. And even though you have difficulty falling upright from the top of the waterfall to the bottom of the mountain, you will enjoy your life. Now, my memory is making contact with Carolyn and other mostly younger people who were running Tassajara. It seemed natural in conversations over meals to say, so what are you going to do, after you leave Tassajara? What's your hopes? What's your dreams? I heard on the news or someplace that she had plans to go to graduate school. But what she said to me was, I remember this, one never knows what really happened, but I'm pretty sure she said to me, she said, I want to stay at Tassajara. She said Tassajara. She, in a way that we would never ask for or want to imagine, Carolyn is now in perpetuity a part of Tassajara. I mean, as we all go, we go down, we come back up, and they take her body out. But I have this feeling, Carolyn's a Tassajara. It's what who knows what or how we express things that we know but we don't know. And that gives me great solace. And then I think, well, she's become one of the ancestors. And we, many of you know, Paula Arai developed and we enacted at Dharma Heart Zen, we'll do it again at Everyday Zen this Wednesday evening, a ritual of homage to our Buddhist mothers. because traditionally, the traditional lineage was passed, the way it's recorded was passed through men. And more recently, of course, because I'm a living example of it, women are beginning to show up in that document. It's like, here we are, but we know we were always here. So, and so there these kind of rituals and recognition and new scholarship that's happening is beginning to fill the gaps and to acknowledge what always was. So I wanted to spend just a little time I often note, but then I see things this way, and I don't know that somebody must have written a book about this or something, is how much loss and death there is in the stories of our Buddhist ancestors. Shakyamuni Buddha, which we'll talk about in a minute. Dogen lost both his parents. We all know when there's loss, it makes you pay attention and it makes you notice life in a different kind of way. So I would like to begin by noting that birth and death and grief are part of this life. That everything comes through a womb, the womb of the Tathagata, the womb of a particular woman. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the story about Shakyamuni Buddha's beginnings, which is, of course, the story about his two mothers, Maya and Mahapajapati. So let me, first of all, here's the new scholarship, some of it, here's one from Wendy Garling, Stars at Dawn, Forgotten Stories of Women in the Buddha's Life. I'm just going to read you little bits of it. She says, all the early biographies share key elements, namely the Buddha's birth as a prince and heir to the throne, renunciation of kingdom and family, enlightenment, and a teaching career taking place over a lifespan of about 80 years. The traditional version comes down to us today in reduced form as a simple parable of a solitary hero engaged in a spiritual quest for truth. Repeated ubiquitously over the millennia in Buddhist literature and art, first in the East and now in the West, this traditional biographical account has become largely fixed over time, a religious artifact that serves as a narrative explanation of how and why Buddhism arose. While it contains Buddhist lessons that may be construed as inspiring as a story, it offers little, if anything, that is relatable or empowering for women. Mm-hmm. So I want to add in here how quickly things have changed. When I was a young woman, Carolyn's name at San Francisco Zen Center, Richard Baker was the abbot, and I remember Blanche Hartman, who was pretty feisty, who became the first woman abbess at Zen Center. Blanche, who was strongly feminist, would express that maybe we were ignoring something that needed to be paid attention to. And this is all mine. I always want to say, this is my memory. Who knows what was really happening? But this is the way I saw it and experienced it. And Richard Baker would just say, there's no gender here, get over it. And maybe Blanche was a little, maybe she was a little strong and needed to come more towards, we all have to find our place in the spectrum of where we are. But when I stepped out of the monastery and realized how much had been happening out in the world with feminism while we were cloistered in this monastery, and how much women had been standing, that Blanche wasn't doing anything the rest of the world wasn't doing, it was kind of a catch-up act of things are changing. And now things have changed, and there are many more women teachers and abbots and scholarship, and that's really important to note. And things are embedded deep in our psyches, we know that too. And also I want to note that Dogen wrote a fascicle about the equality of men and women, and said in Dogen-esque way, when he gets feisty pretty much, as I remember it, is if you think women are second to you, you're a dummkopf and you should look more deeply and just get over yourselves. It's a strong and beautiful fascicle. Maybe we'll look at it sometime. And I want to recommend that in the SCBA Women's Series, Linda Ruth Cutts, one of the abbots of Zen Center, is going to give a talk on that fascicle. Should be really interesting. I mean, they all are, but that aspect of it. And one of the things I particularly love is, as I think you know, Buddha's earth-touching gesture, and I think you can, I think you can certainly find it online, but I think in the Asian Art Museum there's also a depiction of, so it's an ancient depiction of the earth goddess. When he touches the earth goddess comes up and touches him, and it's translated as the earth shook like a joyful woman. It's like finally somebody's sitting down on the earth with and for all beings. So Wendy Garland really brings forward the sacred feminine and goddesses that nobody talks about. You know, it's like we don't talk about that in Zen, but you know what? It's here. So okay. Maya, Buddha's mother. I was lucky enough to do a Buddhist pilgrimage in my life, and went to the site of Buddha's birth, a beautiful tree, people's pilgrimage site. Maya is remembered as a beautiful young queen who gave birth to the Buddha in the lush woodland of Lumbini's Grove, surrounded by women, including her sister Mahapajapati, and clanswomen from her village who arrived to assist with the birth. Maya had always intended to deliver in Lumbini's Grove, taking leave of her husband to travel there in the full bloom of pregnancy, accompanied by her female attendants, as this was a sacred place of protection for women in childbirth. On arrival, as the pangs of labor overcame her, she sought refuge under a magnificent sala tree, whose indwelling goddess lowered her boughs in recognition that the time of the birth had come. Grasping a branch with her raised right hand, Maya, who was standing with her sister gently supporting her, delivered her only child, a son whose destiny was to cast a brilliant light into the darkness of human suffering. As the infant, Buddha's life began in this sublime setting, delivered into the hands of women, so Maya's life sadly ended. The stories are consistent that she died soon after childbirth. Buddha's birth mother, died in childbirth. You can't tell me that's not a formative part of the life that he was born into. I mean, you can't. Or I would listen to you kindly, but everything I know says to me that's a pretty big deal. And he grew up in a time where it wasn't unusual that if a birth mother died, that the family was there to receive the child. So here, Mahapajapati, sister, they were both, Mahapajapati and Sister Maya were chiefs of the Shakya clan. And from all the legends we know, Mahapajapati became the Buddha's adoptive mother, the only mother he ever knew. So now in most of the stories, we hear about Mahapajapati, but we don't hear about Maya. I mean, that's the way this happened, is they become simplified. And there's Sanskrit stories, there's Pali stories. She says in here, the Buddha never wanted to write down or have anybody write down his personal story because that wasn't what he was teaching, and that was the time that he was in. But there is scholarship, and people are going back and finding this. We learn that Mahapajapati took him to her breast and nursed him when Maya died and loved him as her own son throughout her life. While the stories persist in referring to her as his aunt or foster mother, they make it clear that in every way Mahapajapati was no less a loving mother than Maya would have been. So then the story goes on. Most of you know this story. At 29, Siddhartha left home and left a grieving wife and child. Wife Yasodhara, child Rahula, who later became his disciples. But again, that's one interpretation of the story, and I think sometimes in our bodies skip that part of the story. Is, oh, there was a death. Oh, there was, and in that time, that wasn't uncommon for men to leave and go on spiritual quests and to leave their families behind. But she brings forward stories of a lot of grief and a lot of people asking him to stay. Mm-hmm. He was gone for 6 years on a spiritual quest. And when the Buddha returned to Kapilavastu after his enlightenment, we're skipping big parts of the story, and you all know parts of these stories too. Mahapajapati, the woman who raised him as his second mother, she was in his 50s or 60s when he returned. So no longer a young woman. She had become deeply revered. Pajapati means mother of a great child. And then the story, and this isn't just from Wendy Garland, this is from different sources, is that when Siddhartha left, many sons and husbands went with him. So there were lots of grieving women and families, including Pajapati's son Nanda. She had a son. And when the king, her husband, died soon after, she was truly alone. Lots of loss and grief here. It says one by one, I think this is from Sally Tisdale, women found their way to her, begging for help and support since their own sons and husbands had gone with Siddhartha. You just never know in this life, do you? I just want to interject here with Carolyn. It's like, I don't think that's the end of the story. She was born, she was 30, this happened, and then she died. I just don't, I mean, there's never an end to any story. You just keep breathing and holding things in a big heart, body, mind. 100 million thousand causes and conditions in this life. And we call someone dead, and of course they did die, you know? I mean, let's not skip that part. But people don't die. Something. Nobody's separate from everything else. So something continues in a way that's mysterious, and we need to keep our hearts and bodies and minds open to, and what is the mystery of this life and birth and death, and what are we all doing, and what are beginnings and endings? So anyway, so people were finding themselves coming, women came to her because they had experienced a similar loss. And then the Kolyans and the Shakyas, who were different tribes, one was his tribe, one was her tribe, then they went to war with each other. And many more men died. And then those widows too came to Mahapajapati, looking for solace and refuge, until 500 women were around her. I love this story. All of it, because if this hadn't happened, then that wouldn't happen. So, it says 500 were with her, a great many, for comfort, support, with deep spiritual questions, and to be with women they trust and with common experience, and with a deep spiritual aspiration, and who knew of suffering. So, Siddhartha, returning, now as the enlightened Buddha, more and more people are recognizing him. When he came near Kapilavastu again, which is where Mahapajapati and all of this was happening, as he was preparing to leave once again, Pajapati begged for an audience with him. "Let us come with you," she cried. "Let us join you." Because these were all men. I mean, that was the tradition. And the Buddha said to her, well, who knows what he really said. "Give this up, my mother," he said, not unkindly. "Do not ask." I love that in the Hidden Lamp translation, it's the Buddha said, "Do not set your heart on this." Mm-hmm. Yeah. I carry that with me as a koan, as a yes, I will. Do not set your heart on this. Oh, yeah? It's like, well, your heart's already set. Somebody can't tell you to not set your heart on it. You just have to find out what it is and what it looks like, and to do it in a way, because this is what's so beautiful about this story. So she asked again, because she knew. "No," he said again. "You should be home. What would become of the world if women didn't take care of the home?" Well, again, I think this is Sally Tisdale, and who knows what he really said. She's obviously milking this for all it's worth. And she asked again, and he refused again. This story has been brought into question by scholarship too, because we also know a lot of these stories, of course, were later written down as Buddhism became institutionalized, and the institutionalization and institutions were run by monks, and so the stories were set in place systems and patriarchal systems that were cultural and were trying to be perpetuated. And Buddhism was already radically shaking up the social landscape by getting rid of social classes and saying untouchables could come. And I mean, Buddha was already doing something big. I might well imagine that thinking shaking up the whole order with women in the home is like, maybe we could go around this one. But she wasn't going to give up. And then he left. They continued on their pilgrimage, and she was left behind. Pajapati sat down on the ground, cut off her hair, and put on yellow rags, which is the traditional yellow robes. And so did 500 other women with her, and they set out for Vaisali, and they walked day and night for 150 miles. Did I write down the one that's in the Hidden Lamp is that they walked barefoot, and their feet bled, and they wept the whole way. So this wasn't like being obstreperous or what, it's just like, my heart is set on this. This is where I want to be. This is my life. And she walked, and her feet bled, and they walked in the dust. And they walked day by day for 150 miles. Sometimes I think, when I complain, maybe you complain, think, this is too hard. Sitting zazen, it's like whatever we think continuous practice, just that place where you get into whatever you get into of, well, my heart's set on it, but, anyway, I think you have some sense of what I'm talking about. And I think this story really inspires me. She was so clear about what she wanted and what her life was, what the deepest heart of her life is. And when they reached Visalia, the women stood outside the gate, crying all together, and made a terrible noise. Well, here it says Mahapajapati was dirty, and her bare feet were covered with sores, and she stood right in front of the crowd. So now I want to say, I also don't want to skip that the Buddha's heart was set on this. That's why he went off in the story for 6 years. And the people that the husbands and sons and brothers who left, their hearts were set on this too. It's like everybody. And some people weren't, that's just not, it's a peculiar thing. Those who, Norman Fisher calls them the religious. And I mean, we aren't particularly, look like religious, although early on, I wasn't raised Catholic, but I was always fascinated by those nuns. But my tradition didn't have any way to do that, and who knows? But the people with the Buddha and the people with Mahapajapati had a deep sense of practice being the center of their lives. And it's also really important that one of the things that Buddha did around this story is that there didn't used to be a way for lay people, laymen and lay women to practice. It was all monastic. And he was very clear that this is for everybody. So these are radical, turning stories. So Ananda appeared at the gate and said, "Why are you here?" And she says, "Because we want to be here, and we have no place to go. How can we take care of our homes if this is interesting. How can we take care of our homes if no one is home? We long for the truth of this life the same as you do. We are the same as you are now." So Ananda went inside, told the Buddha continued to refuse, and after the third time the Buddha said yes. There's a ceremony that some traditions in Asia, the women do a ceremony thanking Ananda for intervening. It's a very formal ancient ceremony of thank you for helping us, which is kind of a beautiful, we're all in this. So then story goes on. She lived for 120 years. And it seems to be documented as the leader of the woman's Sangha. And when she knew she was dying, she asked for the Buddha to visit her. And it was against monastic rules to visit, for a monk to visit a sick nun. And this is early on, and there was the Vinaya, and there were lots of rules, but the Buddha changed the rules anyway. So, everybody's learning and growing up here. Let me see, I marked this. See what I marked about when she died. He's a great miss. Finally, after paying homage to her beloved son and teacher, Mahapajapati departs that night, attaining nirvana simultaneously with her company of nuns. Miracles continue to occur in heaven and on earth. The Buddha announces her cremation, and by his power, which requires no effort, all who wish to attend are immediately transported, resulting in the largest assembly ever gathered during the time of his ministry, larger even than at his own cremation. The gods bring 501, this is Lotus Sutra stuff, if you like this stuff. You won't mind all this. The gods bring 501 golden litters upon which the corpses of Mahapajapati and the nuns are borne through the sky to the burning site, a supreme honor, the chronicler notes, one that was not accorded either the Buddha or any of his disciples. So in the end, when she dies, there's a really deep acknowledgement of the importance of her. and her practice, and those who practiced with her. A separate funeral pyre built of sandalwood and saturated with perfume oil is made for each of the bodies. All corporal remains are consumed by fire except Mahapajapati's body, which remains like a heap of precious jewels, a testament to her supreme sainthood. And the Buddha says in eulogy, "Know this, O monks, she was most wise, with wisdom vast and wide. She was a nun of great renown and master of great powers. She cultivated divine ear and knew what others thought. In former births before this one, she mastered divine eye. All imperfections were destroyed. She'll have no more rebirths." So again, mythological and passed down as parable, but a good balance to round out the stories that we know. And it takes me back to Carolyn and the mystery of dying tragically, 30 years old, at Tassajara by falling down a waterfall. My sense is that's not the end of the story. I mean, it never is. And that people all over the country, somehow news of what had happened got out all over the country, and people were sending in ways to help and condolences, and it's touched so many lives. We just don't understand or know anything in this life. And I think I want to just close by saying, let's continue to not take anyone or anything for granted. You know, I just assumed I would meet her again, and I will in lots of different forms and right here. But we don't know. Just don't take this own life for granted. You have no idea when the ground's going to fall out from underneath you. I couldn't see Gretchen back there. We're just talking about Gretchen goes out for hikes by herself because she loves the wilderness. You know, please love the wilderness. Please love your life. And please, if you're going off someplace, always let us know. If you can, sometimes take people with you. I mean, I know I love it when I get to go by myself, but that's one of the more dangerous trails at Tassajara, and we all did it. We are all part of a lineage of bodhisattvas. I don't care what body you got. Male, female, gender fluid. Yeah, I mean, we could also say birds and bees and fish, but for right now we'll stay with human beings. As the Tibetans would say, and do say, we're all each other's mother. We are all deeply and profoundly related. So we would never ask to grieve, and grieving is part of being human, and it's part of what tenderizes and opens our lives. And it's a beautiful way to think of as we last week and this week in Sangha turn towards our lineages, as each of the names are shining bodhisattvas who set their heart on wanting to be free, to know the truth of this human life, which is we are all deeply interconnected and beyond anything we can imagine. And that's I'm so glad there's lineage. I'm so glad we know that there are particular names, and then we also know that in between the names there are 100 million other names that didn't get named, and that they're equally important, and that each one of your names and our names is we're helping each other in that way. And every now and then we notice something like Carolyn falling down a waterfall, and maybe wake up a little bit more to the truth of this life and how we want to live it together. So thank you for letting me process my grief in this way, which is also love and gratitude for each of you and me, and for this place and for this day. May our intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to be it. We can all stand up and do some more, joyfully get to bow some more. It means we have a body.